Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
A cat keeps watch on silent ground. Welcome to Vale Files. I am your host, Thorn. Share your location. I treasure each comment. The story starts here. Fog lay upon Baker Street like a grey shawl thrown over the city's thin shoulders, and the lamps made little islands of weak gold in a sea of vapour. I had gone round to see Holmes after an early call upon a patient in Montague Street, and found him, as I have so often found him, loose-limbed in the armchair by the hearth, his long fingers steepled, his eyes half-closed, and his keen, ascetic face lit by the glow from the coals. The violin stood in its corner, the chemical table bore the signs of some nocturnal experiment, and the morning's papers lay riddled with his pencil marks. As I entered, he glanced once, not at my face, but at my boots, and the ghost of a smile passed over his features. "You have been obliged to reassure Mrs. Harbury about her elder boy," said he. "A simple rash, not contagious, but her sister is with child and has doubled the alarm. You were at pains to persuade them both." "Upon my word, Holmes." "The speck of starch on your cuff is from the poultice she persists in applying. The slight scent of soap flakes is of the brand she favours, quite too harsh for an infant's skin. And the damp on your left trouser knee tells me you knelt by the child's cot and not by a chair. As for the sister, there was a second cup on the tray you set down, and someone moved it after you. An anxious household, but none the worse for your visit." "You grow monstrous, Holmes," I laughed, surrendering my hat and settling opposite him. "If you were to apply such faculties to the affairs of state, every government in Europe would be at your mercy." "Governments are dull," he returned. "They act by rule." "It is the singular man who interests me, the one who, through caprice or necessity, chooses to depart from the common path. I think we shall shortly be visited by such a one." He tapped the newspaper nearest his hand. "There is a paragraph here which has already brought me 2 notes and a promise of a third." I took up the paper. Among notices of minor robberies and inquests, my eye fell upon a small column headed "Singular Occurrence in a City Churchyard." It related that at St. Botolph's, a quiet church off Fetter Lane, a stray cat had, upon 3 successive nights, lain immovable upon the fresh grave of Sir Alistair Fenwick, lately deceased. On the 4th night, a young clerk, one Owen Briggs, employed by the late baronet's solicitors, had been discovered dead against the iron railings that ran along the church's north wall. The report was sober, but left a disagreeable impression. A cat upon a grave, and a man found lifeless within yards of it, his hat on the ground and his face composed as if in sleep. The police, it said, were investigating. "A cat and a churchyard," said I. "It smacks more of legend than of law." "Legend," said Holmes, "is too often a veil for design." "Hark! Your legend is upon our stairs." There came a quick, light step upon the landing, the impatient rap of a gloved hand, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in a gentleman whose dark frock coat and neat cravat could not conceal the distress written in every line of his sallow, scholarly face. He was followed more soberly by Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, whose dry features were set in their usual air of civil wariness. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," cried the first, bowing, "I am the Reverend Elias Whitcomb, vicar of St. Botolph's. I beg your indulgence for this intrusion, but Inspector Lestrade himself advised me, and I confess I am hard-pressed between an unruly parish rumour and a private grief." "Sit, Reverend," said Holmes, indicating the chair I had lately left. "Inspector, you know your way about our humble premises. Watson, draw the curtains a little. The fog puts too much of London in here with us. Now, Reverend, your churchyard." "It is as the paper says," the clergyman began, clasping and unclasping his thin hands. "Sir Alistair Fenwick was buried on Tuesday, On Wednesday night, the sexton found a grey cat couched upon the mound, and though he clapped his hands and shooed the creature, it would not stir. He left it there, thinking no harm. The next night it returned. The third likewise. On Friday, that poor young man, Mr. Briggs, was discovered. He had come, it seems, to place some paper, heavens, I know not what, in the hands of Lady Fenwick's maid, who had asked him to meet her by the north gate. The maid swears he never came. The watchman, making his round near midnight, found Mr. Briggs leaning against the railings as if resting, his head turned aside. He was dead. Violence? I asked. That is the deuce of it, put in Lestrade, perching upon the arm of a chair with professional economy. None to speak of. No mark on him save a little bruise at the collarbone, and that might have been made in falling. No robbery. His watch was in his pocket, and his purse contained 2 sovereigns and some silver. His heart, the doctor says, was sound enough. The cat, blast it, was upon the Fenwick grave again, calm as a bishop. I told the press to keep that out, but some busybody has a tongue looser than his teeth. Holmes had listened, with his head bowed and his eyes veiled. He now stretched out his hand towards the clergyman's hat, which lay on the rug where Mr. Whitcomb had let it fall, and with a touch as delicate as a woman's lifted from the felt a short, pale hair that clung to it. He held it up between finger and thumb, and the light caught upon its tip, which showed a faint powdering of white. "A cat's hair, clearly," said he. "Grey. The white at the tip is lime, mortar, or chalk laid over freshly turned soil. Your sexton tried to chase it, and it rolled on the mound, or else the creature has made that place its regular couch. Tell me, Reverend, is the grave dressed with flowers?" "With rosemary and yew," said Whitcomb, startled, "and a wreath of heliotrope. Lady Fenwick placed it there herself." Holmes's nostrils dilated almost imperceptibly. "Heliotrope? There is a faint almond in that, is there not?" "You have been among the wreaths this morning. I smell it still upon your sleeves." "It is true," the clergyman admitted. "I went out early to say a prayer for the dead, and to calm the sexton, who swears upon his livelihood that no cat blessed our ground until this week. The neighbours talk of a curse. Lady Fenwick is ill with nerves, and now this poor clerk," Lestrade shrugged. "We shall have the body examined more closely. There is a blue dust, no more than a smear, upon his right cuff that I don't like the look of. Could be from stonework, could be from a mason's apron. We'll trace it. But as for cats," he spread his hands. "If I could collar every cat that sits where it shouldn't, I'd empty half the window-sills in Holborn." "Blue," murmured Holmes, as if to himself. "A useful colour. It keeps strange company in the trades, laundry, printing, and tailoring among them. And your sexton? He is a sober fellow?" "A worthy man," said Whitcomb quickly. "Tom Pargeter? He has English earth beneath his nails and little else. He's frightened, Mr. Holmes, and ashamed to own it." Holmes rose, and for the first time his eyes took on that thin, bright light, which to me had always been the signal that the game had begun. He crossed to the mantel, and stood with his back to the fire, his long figure thrown into relief against the glow. "Let us set aside the cat," said he, "not because it is unimportant, but because it is too conspicuous. When a trivial thing becomes central in men's mouths, I am tempted to place it temporarily at the circumference. A man is dead, without visible violence, at a rail he might have leaned upon in the ordinary course of walking. He went to meet a maid who did not see him. He went by a gate, perhaps, that was not the one he ought to have used. There is blue dust upon his cuff, and a cat that prefers a particular mound in a churchyard, above all the world's warm hearths. He looked from one to the other of us with a quick, bird-like motion. "Inspector, have any masons or stonecutters worked in your churchyard of late?" "The old vault on the north side has a broken grating," said Lestrade. "Pargeter put up a board to keep out the boys." "A mason looked at it last week, but hasn't yet mended it. That wall is damp and grows saltpetre. Your boots pick up the white of it if you're not careful." "Saltpetre and blue," said Holmes softly. "No, do not ask me for conclusions, Watson. I have none that would satisfy your very proper medical conscience. The facts, however, invite us to walk among them. Reverend Whitcomb, if Lady Fenwick will permit, I should like to view the grave before the light fails this afternoon, and again when it is altogether gone. The living are generous with lies by daylight. At night, even the dead may tell a truth." Whitcomb stood up, relief and apprehension warring upon his face. "You will come?" "Oh, Mr. Holmes, you will come at once. The talk grows worse by the hour. They say the beast chooses its master's enemies, that whoever tries to move it shall—" He checked himself with a visible effort. "Forgive me. I am a man of the cloth, and such fancies should disgust me. Yet I have not slept." Holmes's expression softened by no hair's breadth. He was never cruel, but neither did he blink for tears. "We will be with you by 4, said he. "Inspector, you will oblige me by keeping the press at bay until then." "A little ignorance in Fleet Street is, for once, devoutly to be wished." Lestrade rose, tugging his gloves. "I can keep them out of the yard," said he, "but not out of their ink pots. If there's a story, they'll give it a tail and whiskers." His thin lips twitched. "And as for your cat, Mr. Holmes, if you can tell me why it likes that mound better than any other, I'll buy it a saucer of cream." "You may have to make it Valerian," Holmes returned, and his eyes flickered upon the Reverend's sleeve, where, now that he mentioned it, there was indeed the faintest ghost of a sweet, rootish odour, a perfume which, though I could not then have named it, remains associated in my mind with old apothecaries and the sleepy corners of herb gardens. When they had gone, Holmes reached for his hat, and the old villainous ulster he wore when the weather conspired against him. He took up his cane and paused only to slip into his pocket a small magnifying lens, a tape, and a little tin such as might hold lozenges, but which I knew contained more questionable treasures. "Come, Watson," said he, "there is work for your eyes and my nose." And it will be instructive to learn whether a cat lies still for love of the dead, or because the living has taught it to. St. Botolph's lay in a thicket of lanes behind Fetter, its modest spire pricking the grey like a pin. By the time our cab set us down, the light had thinned to a colourless wash, and the damp from the stones had crept into one's bones. The vicar awaited us by the lich gate with the sexton, a square, weathered fellow whose cap sat obediently upon work-roughened hair. Lestrade, who could not resist the lure of a puzzle that had begun to smell of the press, joined us with a brief nod and a glance as quick as a needle. "You will find it as it was, Mr. Holmes," said Whitcomb, subdued. "I bade Tom touch nothing but to keep off the idol." Holmes returned no more than a murmur, for already his gaze had travelled beyond us to the north side, where a sombre yew overshadowed a line of older vaults and a run of iron railings that turned the churchyard like a black stitch in a white hem. He did not go to the new mound at once, but to my surprise paced straight to the north gate. A narrow wicket set within the longer rail which gave on to a lane. There he stood, head a little bent, as if listening to the iron. Presently he drew from his pocket the lens and a small tape. "Watson, your eye," said he. "See here where the second upright from the latch bears a duller sheen than its neighbours." A man might polish such a bar unconsciously by leaning. I stooped. At about the height of a man's collarbone, there was indeed a faint matting of grease, as if some coat had rested there frequently. Holmes touched the place with a scrap of paper and held it close. There was the slightest shadow, not black, but bluish, upon the fibre. "Soap blue," he muttered, "too soft for pigment, too friable for chalk, and it takes to grease like a lover. Inspector, has any of your people handled this gate with a laundress's apron between fingers and iron?" Lestrade's eyebrows twitched. "We have handled a deal of iron in our time," said he, "but aprons we leave to our betters." "Quite. We will mark the height." He flicked the tape and read off the figure as if it were a note on his violin. 5 feet 9 from the path. Our poor clerk would about meet it with his clavicle if he placed his chin on his hands to speak with someone beyond. "Pray do not touch the latch." He now crossed to the fresh grave, a modest mound dressed with rosemary and the purple clusters of heliotrope, their scent, even in the cold air, fine and sweet. The sexton shifted from foot to foot and took off his cap. The place had that new orderliness which betrays a hand that has come back twice to put right what grieves it to see disarranged. At the head a narrow card still hung from wire beneath the wreath, Lady Fenwick's name, sober and dignified. Holmes did not attend to that handwriting. He crouched, drawing his fingers lightly along the edges of the mound, as a pianist might feel the temper of keys. Twice he paused, and the second time he produced from the soil, by the gentlest of insinuations, a shred of pale, fibrous matter no longer than a fingernail. He smelled it, laid it upon the back of his hand, and closed his eyes. "Valerian," said he, "old root, crumbled and pressed into the topsoil at the head and, once, near the foot. The application is recent. The oil has not wholly gone to the air. Your cat has not chosen this couch, Reverend. It has been invited to it. Some cats will leave their best saucer for Valerian Whitcomb coloured." "You mean deliberately? To what end could a Christian desire a beast to lie upon a grave?" "To make men talk," Holmes answered, and there was a dry, thin music in it. "An omen is cheaper than an advertisement and sticks better." Lestrade gave a short sound that might have been a laugh if it had not encountered his professional decorum. "If the cat be but a showman's trick, what of the—"
"Lad? What indeed?" Holmes's eyes went to the yew's shadow, and then, very swiftly, to the hem of my own coat. He dusted at it with a forefinger and held up a grit that shone salt white. "Saltpetre from the damp wall, Watson. You brushed it as we came by. Our man would have done the same if he stood to the rail to listen. Now, Tom Pargeter." The sexton started as if a bell had been struck. "Sir? You saw nothing on the Friday but the body?" "Nothing, sir." "I make my round when the clock at St. Dunstan's strikes the quarter, and again at the hour. I was coming by the north when I spied him. Standing it looked, but his head was dropped. I called, and when he wouldn't answer, I went to him. He was coldish in the cheek, but soft enough in the hand. There was a bit of blue rubbed there on the iron, just a smear like, and I thought to fetch my cloth to wipe it, but I didn't." The Reverend said, "Leave all." "You did. Very right," said Holmes. "And before that? Any callers to the place other than mourners?" The sexton's brow puckered. "There's a woman comes Thursday mornings with a basket, an herb woman from Holborn. She sells to folk for teas and such. She has a grey cat trails her sometimes. It sits bold as brass if she lets it. And there's a tailor as cuts through this way to the alehouse by the lane, blue on his fingers like from chalk. But Friday no one I took stock of, sir." "The herb woman's name?" "Mrs. Roper, sir. Lives behind the Coopers." but I can't say as the cat's hers always. It's a street sort. They call it malkin in the yards." Holmes's nostrils gave the faintest quiver, as if some delicate string had answered. He had his little tin out now, and with a scrap of card, he took from the head of the mound the merest pinch of the soil in which the valerian had been folded. He sealed the tin with wax from his pocket, wrote a sign upon it with his nail, and made it disappear. "Inspector," said he, "will you oblige me by stationing one of your men in the vestry door this evening, and another by the lane, to observe without interference? I would not have our cat deprived of its evening comforts by over-zeal." "You mean to watch?" asked Lestrade. Holmes glanced at the leaden sky. "The fog will come up off the river by 8. Our demonstration will then be complete." We spent the interval in a slow survey that to any other would have seemed mere dawdling. Holmes measured the spacing of the railheads with his tape and noted the burr upon one where rust had eaten shallowly into the iron. He sniffed the heliotrope and the yews separately and then together, as if testing the harmony of a chord. He examined the inside of the latch at the gate without touching it, peering along the line where paint grew thin, and laid his lens for a moment upon the cobbles directly outside, where a faint track was visible to his trained sight. Narrower prints turned slightly.
Inward at the toes, as a woman's often are, and with a habit of lightness at the heel. "The maid?" I breathed. "Or any woman of the class that must walk quickly and tread softly," he returned. "But observe, there is a minute dark spot on the third stone, not a drop fallen, but something set down and lifted again, a flat thing damp on its undersurface. A bottle, Watson, would leave a circle, a square tin leaves an angle. A tin like yours?" I said, startled. "Like mine if mine were not devoted to a more wholesome chemistry." He looked amused for the briefest instant. No conclusions. The mere coexistence of valerian and a cat does not hang a woman. It may, however, draw a man dusk oozed into the churchyard, as a kind of substance. The stones became spectres, and the grass a smudged carpet beneath the yews funereal spread. We placed ourselves where Holmes indicated, he within the shadow of a buttress with the vicar. I a pace behind the north gate inside the rail, Lestrade somewhere in the obscurity of the lane. The sexton, much against his instincts, withdrew. At 8:15 there was a soft, scudding sound, and the grey shape materialized out of nothing, precise as a thought called to mind. It sprang lightly to the mound, turned thrice with feline ritual, and settled its chin upon its paws with its eyes slitted in dreaming content. Twice it lifted its head and twice let it fall again, as if the very earth breathed balm to it. Holmes's hand in the gloom touched my sleeve. "Now listen," he whispered. At first I heard only the slow drip from a gutter and the distant chime of wheels upon stones, then very low, the susurrus of feet that had learned to be secret, and a rustle as of wire drawn softly against iron. There came next a nearly imperceptible clink at the height we had marked upon the bar, the tiniest catch of breath, no more, and a faint odour, poised between almond and bitter herbs, slid along the iron like a ghost. "Down," said Holmes, and his voice had steel in it. "If the wind shifts, keep your mouth closed." Our showman sets his scene again. The shape beyond the rail was no more than a deeper fold in the fog until a hand, gloved but bare at the tips, slid a loop of fine wire round the bar we had marked. The loop held some dark, wetted pad like a sparrow's heart, which the unseen guided up, inch by inch, until it kissed the iron at the height of a man's clavicle. A scent stole to us, almond and something more acrid beneath, and I, who had scoffed at the paper's talk of sleeping faces, felt an involuntary tightening in my chest. Holmes's arm pressed me back. He moved with that pantherine decision which is as much silence as speed. Something white flashed in his fingers, a folded strip of wet cloth which he swathed about the bar with a single twist, interposing it between the iron and the pad. With his other hand he whisked out a little steel hook, caught the wire and snatched both wire and pad from the rail, dropping the latter into his tin and clapping on the lid with a click that sounded loud as a shot to my strained ear. "Now, Lestrade," he called low. There was a rush in the lane, the scrabble of feet on cobble, a gasp, and the flutter of skirts where the fog broke like torn gauze. A figure sprang back, slipped on the damp stone, recovered, and darted like a hare. Lestrade's oath cracked across the darkness, and the chase streamed away towards Fetter Lane, the inspector, 2 men he had placed, and the fugitive's whispering steps dwindling in the murk. The cat, startled, leapt from the mound, hung for a second with its back arched, and melted into the church's shadow as if it had been cut from it. Holmes, without stirring from the rail, thrust the tin into my hand. "Hold that tight, Watson," and breathe through the mouth as little as nature allows. "Reverend, keep your people back." He stooped for the wire and drew it toward him, paying out what seemed an extraordinary length for such a simple contrivance. At the end of it dangled a little wooden reel wrapped in waxed thread to which the loop had been hitched. The thread, when he touched it, left a faint smear like the first stroke of a watercolour upon paper, blue, not brilliant, but the humble blue of laundresses bluing. Lestrade reappeared at a trot, his hat askew and his jaw squared with vexation. "Lost her," he said between breaths, "turned into the alley by the Coopers and was gone like smoke out of a chimney. But she was a woman, right enough, shawl over the head, short, quick feet. I near had her by the sleeve when she spun me with the wire." "A practised wrist," said Holmes coolly. "You saw her hands?" "Gloves with the finger ends gone, poor folks' fashion. And the smell, well, it's on me now." He grimaced and spat upon the cobbles. "Sugared almonds at a fair, and yet it makes a man think of a chemist." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Just so." "Your men?" "Both behind me." One tumbled over a coster's barrow and near took a tooth out of a pear. "The pears will recover. Pray send one of them to the ale-house in the lane where the tailor cuts through. We shall want to know if our friend with the blue fingers has his pint at this hour on a Friday. And there is an herb woman in Holborn, Mrs. Roper. Have the other find her door and see if her cat is housed or abroad." Lestrade gave a little grunt that was both assent and scepticism, but he went without disputation, and in a short while we 3, the vicar, the sexton, and I, were gathered in the vestry where Holmes had begged the loan of a basin, a jug, and a little common salt. He worked swiftly, without flourish, dissolving a grain or two from the edge of the pad in a spoonful of water, then making some simple addition from a phial that came out of his inner pocket. The mixture clouded faintly. He watched it with that stillness, which in him was more eloquent than any exclamation. "You are making a potion, Mr. Holmes?" Whitcomb asked tremulously. "A test, Reverend," he replied. "There is a compound which, in one guise, sweetens a woman's scent and, in another, shortens a man's life. The difference lies in the hand that prepares it, and the dose." He looked up at me. "Do you perceive the faint blue?" "Not brilliant, modest. It is enough." "You mean," I began, "that our friend in the lane carries a knowledge she should not and applies it with a showman's instinct." He corked the phial and washed the spoon clean, as scrupulous as a surgeon. "This, taken by the mouth, proclaims itself more bluntly. Laid upon a greased bar at the height, where a listener would lean his chest and turn his head to hear a whisper through a gate, well, lungs are wickedly hospitable and skin is less proof than we like to suppose. Our poor clerk stood to parley and took into him what the pad offered. Whitcomb sank into a chair and covered his face. "Good God," he said, "in my churchyard." "In God's air," said Holmes, not unkindly. "The difference is not much to the victim, but it may be everything to the killer. An open place, no hands upon him, no struggle. How then did he die? Why, he leaned where one does not expect death. Lestrade's men came in the space of a quarter-hour, one red-faced and abashed, with a smear of pear upon his sleeve, the other with the damp in his hair and indignation in his eye. The first reported that the alehouse's back parlour had lately made a seat for Mr. Cobb, tailor, of Turnmill Street, a thin, dark fellow with a habit of marking his cuff with chalk when he counted a customer's buttons. He had not shown his nose that evening. The second had found Mrs. Roper's door and Mrs. Roper within it, her basket empty, her cat, if cat it could be called hers, absent, and her hands stained at the creases with a brown, which even to my untrained eye was not ink, but the tang of old roots and leaves. She was flustered enough, the man concluded. Said she'd been out till near 6, selling lemon balm and fennel. Denied knowing any gentleman more than another who bought from the basket. But she's got tins upon tins in that kitchen and a smell that would put you in a sweet shop. Holmes listened and, to my surprise, smiled faintly. Tins upon tins, he repeated, and yet our loop was tied with waxed thread of the sort used by tailors rather than herb wives. Inspector, would you kindly bring Mrs. Roper here, with all gentle speed and consideration? A vicarage parlour is less alarming to a woman than a yard room, and I would have her talk to me while the night is young and her fear not yet persuaded into obstinacy. Lestrade's mouth set. If this is your woman, I'll clap the bracelets on her in any parlour you please. She is, at the least, someone's tool, Holmes returned, and the true hand rarely leaves itself where constables can seize it. No, let her come as a visitor to the Reverend, who owes her for teas to soothe nervous ladies. Meanwhile, Watson, the gate. We went back together into the glimmering yard, where the cat's absence seemed as palpable as its presence had been. Holmes stood again by the iron. He ran his finger along the bar, sniffed, and nodded grimly. They refresh the theatre nightly, he said. They will have it whispered that the dead draw the cat and the cat draws death, and all shall keep away, save those whom a whisper summons to the wicket. Our boy Briggs was summoned. By whom? Not the maid, I think. A maid writes in a round labouring hand and uses twill paper. We shall see the note if it can be found, Lady Fenwick's household, I suggested. If the will. He lifted a hand. Gently. We are but at the second move, and you are talking of mate. We must know what paper Briggs carried, why it would have profited someone to stop his mouth, and why the cat must lie upon Sir Alister's mound to make the tail go down. He paused and added with that dry edge that with him was the nearest approach to feeling. And we must learn, Watson, whether the dead baronet had any enemies who knew a laundress's blue and an apothecary's scent, as well as a lawyer's timetable. The church clock struck 8. The fog, which had thinned while the chase rattled away, drew in again like a curtain. Somewhere beyond the wall a barrel rolled, a man cursed, and a child laughed. The sounds came to us, thinned and gentled by the damp. Lestrade's step returned with 2 others. Mrs. Roper entered hesitantly, shawl about her shoulders, a respectable widow's bonnet tied beneath her chin, and a wicker basket on her arm as if she could not face the night without her stock. Her eyes darted from Holmes to Whitcomb and back again, like a bird in an unfamiliar room. Mrs. Roper, said Holmes gravely, we are grateful you have come. You sell comfort to the living, I think, and someone has tried to make you sell mystery to the dead, Sit you here by the fire. You shall tell us who paid you to strew valerian on Sir Alistair Fenwick's grave, and how much he gave you for your silence." Mrs. Roper's hands clutched the rim of her basket as if it were a rail on a ship. Her mouth set and trembled by turns. Holmes had the gentleness he could show to frightened creatures, though there was nothing lax in his eye. "No one shall trouble you for selling harmless root," he said. "But men will trouble you if you protect them. You were asked to crumble valerian upon Sir Alistair's mound. You did so 3 nights. Tonight you would have done it again if the fog had not grown a conscience." She stared as if the fog itself had whispered. "I am an honest widow," she protested, but the protest wore through like soap at a seam. "They told me it was to quiet talk, that is all." "Who are they?" "A gentleman." She looked down. "He said he had a nervous lady to mind, and a cat would keep away boys, and such like from a fresh grave. He paid me to buy the root and to leave a sprinkle at the head and a pinch at the foot. No more. I do not like churchyards at night, sir. I would not have gone but for the money." "How much?" asked Holmes. She named a sum too generous for a widow's errand. Holmes did not so much as blink. "Describe him." "Tidy?" "Not tall. Dark hair, brushed close. Gloves, though the weather was not so hard as to call for them, and the glove ends cut away." Her eyes flicked to Lestrade. "Like some as works with their fingers. He had a way of counting the coins twice and of drawing the last over his thumbnail afore he let it go." "A tailor's habit," said Lestrade shortly. Mrs. Roper shook her head in haste. "I never said tailor, sir." "Only he smelt of soap, the kind that leaves blue in the water, and there was a bit of wax, the sort they rub on thread, stuck to the lining of his glove. I saw it when he took them off to tie a string. He tied neat, that one Holmes took from the table, the length of waxed thread, and the little reel we had drawn from the wire. He set them down where the lamplight could take them. "Like this?" he asked. Her gaze went to the reel and flinched away as if it looked back at her. "Buttoning twist," she muttered. "No, 36. I buy it at Cobb's for mending. The gentleman had some about him. He cut a bit with his teeth." "And he told you of the cat," Holmes pursued, as if they were 2 women gossiping over a fence. "He asked if the creature would come for valerian." "He asked," she whispered. "He asked if there was a thing that would make cats lie. I told him there is." He nodded as if he had known it already. "He said I was to strew it just so, and to keep my cat from following if I could. I tried. Lord knows I tried. But Malkin's slips like mist. Holmes bent, and with that curious delicacy of his which took the sting out of necessity, he touched the frayed hem of her basket. In the weave there lodged a grey hair, powdered faintly white. He lifted it, and she stared at it like a betrayal. "There is no sin in a cat," said he, "only in men who make use of one. Now this gentleman, did he give you his name?" "He called himself Mr. Vale." The word came out with reluctance. "Said he was acting for a lady who should not be troubled." He spoke soft, but he had a snap in him if one crossed him. "He told me to come by the north side, not the gate by the road." Holmes's glance touched mine for an instant. "A name that is not a name," he murmured. "Very well. And the pad you slid upon the iron tonight, you were to do that too?" She recoiled. I would never hang a thing there. I am a clean woman. I saw naught but what I told, root and wreaths. I never touched the rail." "Quite true," said Holmes quietly. "That trick belongs to another hand. You were hired for the story, not the stroke." He turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, Your tailor looks more interesting than his goose and chalk. Pray send a man to bring Mr. Cobb here, civilly on your arm, and another to keep an eye on his back premises. We shall want them unruffled. And fetch from the mortuary, if you will, the effects taken from Mr. Briggs. I fancy there is a paper among them that will reward a second look, Lestrade, who was more than once saved expense by obeying the particularity of Holmes's requests, threw a word to his men and was gone. In the pause that followed, we sat with the unlovely company of our thoughts. The vicar, recovering some pastoral authority, pressed a cup of weak tea upon Mrs. Roper. She took it with both hands like a penitent. "Mr. Holmes," I said low, "you spoke of a compound that sweetens scent in one guise and destroys in another. Bitter almond, Watson? There is an essence of it which ladies like for their handkerchiefs, innocent enough when properly prepared. There is also a ghost in that scent which, if coaxed out and concentrated by one who knows the way, will hush a man so swiftly that he might seem to fall asleep upon his feet. Add grease to hold it, lanolin or the like, paint it in a hidden place where the breast will press and the head turn, and your victim breathes while he listens. He has not swallowed, he has not struggled, and yet his blood tells a very plain tale under a microscope." The door opened upon Lestrade's return. He set a little leather pocket-book and a handful of small effects upon the table, a cheap watch, a pencil worn to its stump, 2 sovereigns, a scrap of folded paper that had seen rough handling, and a flat tin such as clerks use for lozenges. "We took them at the infirmary," he said. "The doctor had no more to tell us than clean lungs and a stopped heart." Holmes's long fingers sorted the poor relics. The folded paper he laid flat and smoothed with his palm. It bore, in a struggling hand, a line. "At the north rail at 11. The lady cannot be seen to speak with you. Bring the paper. Use the wicket." The I's were dotted late, and the tails of the G's took a loop, not in keeping with the rest. The whole had that clumsy prettiness which betrays a man's attempt at a woman's writing. "A man's fist aping a maid," said Holmes. "It is written with a steel nib, too hard for this paper. The fibres rise. See here, where the strokes thicken and then thin." He paused often to look at a model. "Lady Fenwick's maid," I ventured, "or any woman whose hand a too clever imitator has tried to steal. We will not hang a servant upon a flourish of A.G. He lifted the tin, weighed it, opened it, and drew his breath in a hair. Inside lay not lozenges, but a flake or two of something like sugar, and a square of paper faintly stained blue. "Bluing," he said. "Very good."
Mr. Briggs, you were observant. He tested the rail, Watson. He saw the smear, perhaps even smelt the almond, and yet— Holmes closed the tin. "And yet he came." Why? Because the errand, to his mind, was worth more than the risk. What paper had he to bring? Something that would change a lady's standing or a gentleman's comfort. "Lestrade, your solicitors." "Fenwick and Balcombe," said the inspector promptly. The boy served them. I sent a man to make inquiries. Sir Alistair made a will there 7 years ago. There's talk of a codicil, mere tavern talk so far. Holmes's eye sharpened. Talk does not rise out of dry ground. Fetch me Mr. Balcombe or his partner with their ledger, if they must lug the office upon their backs. And while you are about Christian work, bring Cobb Lestrade went again, a general marshalling his infantry. Holmes stood a moment listening, not to sounds, but to the space between them. "Reverend," said he at last, "your parish will forgive you if you make use of your pulpit in an unusual fashion. Announce on Sunday that you intend to repair the north rail and the old vault on that side, and that all foot traffic after dusk shall be turned by the south gate till Michaelmas. It will gall our friend to lose his theatre." Whitcomb nodded, pale but resolute. They shall forgive me anything if this horror ceases. Mrs. Roper had put down her cup. Her fingers worried at the string of her basket. Sir, Mr. Holmes, he said the cat would keep people away, she murmured. I did not think— You thought as far as your basket, Holmes returned, not unkindly. Next time, think as far as your grave. He turned to me. We shall take the pad to Baker Street. I will make assurance of it for the inspector, whose magistrate will prefer a bottle to a deduction. Then we shall wait for the tailor and the lawyer. Between a waxed thread and a ledger, Watson, much may be stitched. The church clock struck the half-hour. Fog pressed its cool hand upon the windows. In the yard a soft tread came and went. The sexton's, no doubt, and then a lighter pat that made Mrs. Roper's head lift like a hare's. Malkin, treacherous to all sides and faithful only to her senses, slid once more upon the Fenwick mound and settled with the sober air of one who attends to business. Holmes watched her, his face unreadable. Animals are honest, he said. They take what draws them and own it. When men do as much, they call it policy. We will see what policy Mr. Vale serves, and whose. Cobb came in under Lestrade's hand with the uneasy swagger of a small man who fears that dignity may escape through his cuffs if he does not hold them tight. He had a face like a penknife, narrow, bright, and nicked by use, and his coat smelt of hot iron and tallow. The finger ends of his gloves were indeed cut away, and there was a little ghost of blue at the crease where thumb met palm. I'm a tradesman, not— A thief, he began before anyone accused him. If there's blue on me, it's the honest blue that keeps a gentleman's linen white. If there's wax, it's my twist. I sell it in lengths or by the card, and a man must bite a thread some days when his shears are at the far end of the board. Be so good as to sit, Mr. Cobb, said Holmes with that grave courtesy which put the proud at their ease and the brazen off their balance. You sold buttoning twist, no, 36, to a gentleman lately? I sell it every day, to a gentleman who counted his coins twice and drew the last over his thumbnail. A flick ran through the tailor's narrow shoulders. He came last week. Dark hair, neat boots, gloves, as you say? Bought 2 cards, a reel of wax, and asked for a wire fine enough to pull a loop without marking a cloth. I told him I keep wire for stays and bonnets sometimes. He took a length and paid double. That's the truth of it. Name! He wrote Vale in the book, said Cobb sullenly. If it's a false one, it's no fault of mine. He had the look of a valet, neat and impudent. I thought him in a lady's service. Holmes's gaze touched the small ledger Lestrade had coaxed from Cobb's pocket. He turned a page with one finger. Friday evening? Earlier, Cobb returned. 3 days before. He came again Friday to ask the length of a churchyard rail between 2 uprights, if you'll credit it. I laughed. He didn't. He wanted the measure. I told him 5 inches between the bars, but it's nearer 4.5 at St. Botolph's. He said, good, and went. Ah, said Holmes, and nothing more. He leaned upon the vestry table as if it supported his thought rather than his frame. Lestrade seized the advantage. And where were you Friday between 10 and midnight? In my bed, said Cobb promptly, and then ruined it by adding, after I left the alehouse at 9, where you were not seen by your usual companions, Lestrade observed dryly. I sat in the yard, Cobb retorted, the colour rising in his sharp cheeks, where a man may drink without being deafened by a barrel organ. If the constable prefers barrel organs to open air, he may tell my wife so, and she will instruct him otherwise. Holmes lifted his hand as if to cool the talk. Enough. Mr. Cobb, you will remain at your house tonight. Inspector, a man at his back door, another at his front, but no blustering. A timid conscience runs faster than a guilty man if you blow on it. Before Lestrade could retort, there came a heavier tread, and Mr. Balcom of the firm of Fenwick and Balcom was shown into the vestry. He had the respectable amplitude of a solicitor who has dined sensibly on mutton for 20 years, and his watch chain was as broad as his views. Yet his eyes were anxious. He carried a ledger and a tin deed-box key upon a looped ribbon. "This is a sad business, gentlemen," said he,
bowing to Whitcomb and then to us. Young Briggs was a willing creature, too willing perhaps. The senior clerk sent him home twice for overzeal. If I can serve you, I am at your disposal. My partner is at his club, but will attend if required. Your ledgers will suffice for the present, Holmes replied. We are told there is tavern talk of a codicil. Balcom pursed his lips. It is improper to discuss a client's testamentary dispositions, he began, and then, reading something in Holmes's face which he had not been prepared to read, he shifted his ground. Sir Alister executed a codicil this spring, yes. It reduced an annuity to a collateral relative and increased certain charitable bequests. It left untouched the bulk of the estate to Lady Fenwick for life, and thereafter to a nephew in India. The codicil was sealed and lodged. It could not have affected the baronet's funeral, nor the behaviour of cats. Yet someone wished a paper brought to the north rail. Holmes returned, drawing from the table the poor note we had found upon Briggs. Was any direction given for after-hours delivery to Lady Fenwick's maid? None, said Balcom with professional promptness. We do not traffic with maids. If a message is to pass, it passes to the hand that has authority. He took up the paper by its corner. This was not written by any clerk in my office. We teach the round hand, and we forbid flourishes. Then your office has lost nothing? Asked Holmes casually. A sealed packet was handled on Friday afternoon for the perusal of Sir Alister's physician, Balcom admitted, and his anxious eyes flickered. Not opened! Merely produced for inspection of the seal in the presence of Dr. Doyle of Harley Street, no kin to your friend across the water, who wished to be assured that certain words had indeed been added in April. The physician did not need to read. He wished to see Sir Alister's name and the date. The junior clerk, Ellis, brought the packet from the box and returned it. Mr. Briggs had no business with it. Holmes's finger tapped once upon the table. Did Mr. Briggs see the packet? Everyone in the office saw it, Balcom confessed. Sir Alister's people have tongues, and tongues wag staffs. I rebuked them. Holmes accepted the rebuke on their behalf with a slight inclination. He had taken up the dead clerk's lozenge tin again. He turned it, opened it, and with the nail of his little finger worried at the thin square of blue-stained paper that lay within. It lifted, not as a single sheet, but with a whisper that to me, trained in surgery, was the whisper of two skins coming apart. He slid the upper away and exposed beneath it a scrap no larger than a postage stamp. It was vellum, cream, and bore in the corner of a looped hand, the tail of a capital F, and the dot of an I, where the ink had pooled upon a stroke beginning downward. There was a crumb of red, wax adhering to one edge, as from a broken wafer. Balcom made a sound between a groan and an oath. The young fool, he breathed. He took a paring from the codicil. Holmes's voice, when it came, was so gentle that only I who knew him heard the steel beneath it. He took a token, said he, to prove to someone that the paper existed and to bargain with it. He hid it under his blue square, knowing his tin would be searched and his pockets turned. He was more cunning than the hand that killed him. Whitcomb had risen. His face was white. Then the boy died for a sin and a vanity. For a hope, Holmes corrected, not unkindly. Hope wears poor clothes in such offices. Mr. Balcom, who would profit by the codicil's suppression? Balcom, to his credit, did not take refuge in professional smoke. The collateral relative whose annuity was reduced, he said shortly. Mr. Felix Fenwick, a cousin twice removed, resident off and on in London, a gentleman of taste and no patience. The charities would suffer. They do not hire men to press greased pads upon rails. Lady Fenwick would not move a finger to unmake her husband's act, and the nephew in India is beyond our reach. Mr. Felix has quarrelled with us before. Has Mr. Felix a valet? Holmes asked. A Frenchman, Lefebvre. Insolent. I dismissed him from my door last month for demanding to see the codicil. We were all silent a moment, hearing in that insolence the echo of a man who asks churchyard measures and bites thread. Lestrade's eye brightened in a way that augured handcuffs. Holmes, however, raised a palm. "Not yet," said he. "Lefebvre's glove may leave blue, but it does not explain the letter to the maid. Mr. Balcom, did you tell Sir Alister's household that the physician had examined the seal?" "I told no one." The doctor called upon Lady Fenwick later. He is frank in his speech. He may have let it fall. "The doctor's tongue writes no maid's fist," Holmes mused. "Still it puts the scent in the house." He turned to Lestrade. "We will have Lefebvre's feet measured before we allow him to be French in a cell. And Mr. Felix must be visited. I would see whether he counts coins as a tailor does." Balcom, who had been standing as if under a weight, sat at last and wiped his brow. "Mr. Holmes, if that fragment is seen by the wrong eyes, we shall have a petition to the court and a scandal." "It has been seen by the right eyes," Holmes returned, and slipped the vellum scrap back beneath the blue square. He closed the tin and handed it to the solicitor with a bow. "You will keep it as if it were a sacrament. The rest you will leave to us." Cobb, who had watched this with a tradesman's grim fascination, licked his lips. "If there's valets and cousins in it, I want none," he muttered. "I sell thread. A man asked me a measure. I gave it. That's all. That is enough for tonight," said Holmes. "Inspector, place your men. Mr. Balcom, take your treasure home by the long way, and with a sober friend. Reverend, do as I asked with your pulpit. Watson, we shall call upon Lady Fenwick and upon Mr. Felix in the morning. I want to see the maid's hand, and I want to smell the house." "Smell it?" I repeated. The heliotrope, the valerian," he said. And in the lamplight his thin face had that austere beauty which came to it when the pattern first stood clear to him. "Houses keep their own weather, Watson. Some hold grief like damp, some deceit like gas. This one has both. And somewhere in its draughts walks a gentleman who thinks a cat is a curtain and a churchyard a stage." Morning showed a thin stripe of pale between the chimneys, and by 9 we had confirmed in Baker Street, to Lestrade's bureaucratic satisfaction, what Holmes's nose had told him the night before. He performed 2 simple tests at the chemistry table and produced a result that would persuade any magistrate who trusted bottles more than brains. We broke our fast hastily and took a cab to Queen Anne Street, where Lady Fenwick had apartments, while the country house stood shuttered after its funeral dressing. The footman, whose gloves were more dignified than his years, admitted us to a drawing-room where the scent of heliotrope hung as if the flowers were breathing. There were no flowers. Lady Fenwick entered with that air of courage which grief in well-born women sometimes takes when it grows tired of being stared at. She was not young, though the line of her neck had still an unspoiled grace, and her mourning was of that severe fashion which does not solicit pity. She greeted Whitcomb with feeling, Lestrade with faint perplexity, and Holmes with the wary hope of one who has heard the name more often in clubs than in parlours. "If this is about the boy," she said. "I have lain awake wondering how a human creature could die so quietly so near my door." "It is about the boy, madam," Holmes returned, "and about a letter purporting to summon him to your maid, which your maid did not write. May I see her hand?" She rang. A neat creature with anxious eyes presented herself. In answer to Holmes's easy questions, she wrote 2 lines at his dictation. "At the north rail at 11. Bring the paper. Use the wicket upon paper from the lady's blotter." The G's took a straight, modest tail. The I's carried dots placed promptly above their stems. The whole was an unpretending round that any housekeeper would have praised. Holmes compared it with the note from Briggs's pocket with no more ceremony than a surgeon holds his new scalpel to the light and lays it aside. "Not hers," he said simply. "Madam, has anyone in your household spoken openly of Sir Alister's codicil?" Her surprise flickered and went. She met candour with candour. "Dr. Doyle, Sir Alister's physician, told me on Friday that he had satisfied himself as to the seal. He added, with that bluntness which men admire in one another, that certain persons would be disappointed. Mr. Felix will not be pleased," he said. "Mr. Felix has called since?" asked Holmes. "He rapped at my door on Saturday," she replied, the faintest colour rising. "He was civil for Felix, and made me compliments upon my fortitude. His valet waited below. I sent them away as gently as I could. Your house laundresses," Holmes continued, and if the leap in topic surprised her, she did not show it. "Do they use the paper squares of bluing, or the bottle?" "The paper," she said. "I am told it keeps a whiter white." "Why?" "For no reason that need burden you," he returned, and the ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "May I trouble your woman for her scent?" She glanced at the bottle upon the table. "It is heliotrope. I have worn it a year." Holmes lifted the stopper. Even I, whose nose is dull to such things, caught the sweet, almondish whisper that had haunted the wreath by the grave. He dipped a pen and let fall a single drop upon paper. "The innocent ghost," he murmured, "not the other." "Thank you, madam." We were shown, at his request, by a discreet side way to the servants' corridor, and thence to the back stairs, for Holmes had a trick of knowing the geography of a house from the shape of its front door. He paused at the green bays where the maids keep their brushes. His lens made a brief visit to the edge of a block of beeswax and to a card of twist pinned above a shelf. "No, 36, he observed, to Lestrade. "The world is consistent even in small economies." At the yard door he knelt a moment upon the flags. "2 footprints," he said, "both yesterday, the maid's when she went to the bins, turning out slightly, and a man's, narrow, high instep, foreign-made sole. The heel lies lightly, and the toe hard, as if the calf were used to the spring of a riding boot. Lefebvre has good ankles, Inspector. We found Mr. Felix in rooms off Piccadilly such as men of taste and impatience, Balcom's phrase, affect when they cannot afford a house and will not suffer a lodging. He was handsome in that narrow way which pleases until it betrays its economy, and his courtesy was the courtesy of a fencer who keeps the foil between himself and his company. Lefebvre opened the door for us. If insolence has a mode, it was his, elegant, translucent, and constructed. His gloves ended at the first knuckle, showing nails cared for with a zeal that does not belong to England. "What service can I render Scotland Yard and the gentlemen of Baker Street?" said Felix, when Lestrade had put the barest shape of his errand. "If this is about my late cousin's paper, do not be bashful, say so." "It is about a clerk," said Holmes mildly, "and about a note which invited him to the north rail. "Does your pen run to women's hands, Mr. Fenwick?" "You
Have the fingers for it." Felix laughed in the way that tells you more about a man's lungs than his humour. "When I write to women, they do not care for my G's," he returned. "They prefer my adjectives." Holmes let his gaze travel idly round the room, as water runs where the floor inclines. It took in the valet's stand with its polished brushes, the little leather roll that every good valet keeps for sewing, a square of blue paper crumpled upon a washstand like the remnant of some domestic rite, and a block of wax worn down in a shallow, with tooth marks and habit not uncommon to men who sew in haste. Lefebvre, with the smoothness of a conjurer, moved his arm and the roll disappeared in the pocket of his coat. "You use bluing in paper?" Holmes observed, as if the matter had been long dear to him. "I prefer the bottle." "The paper is apt to stray to other uses. It freshens the water more equally," said Lefebvre, and his English was like polished metal, too exact to be easy. He smiled without showing his teeth. "In my country, we are precise and helpful to our employers," said Holmes with a bow that in another man would have been a sneer. "You were helpful at Lady Fenwick's door on Saturday." "I waited in the hall," Lefebvre replied. "My master speaks for himself." Felix had drawn a coin from his pocket and was flipping it along his thumb with the abstraction of a man who must keep some small muscle in motion when a larger one is restrained. Twice he counted it, twice he drew it across his nail before letting it fall back to the pile. If Holmes noted it, he made no sign. He had wandered to the window and stood a moment, looking out as if London itself had written something across the street for his private reading. Presently he turned. "Mr. Fenwick," said he, "your cousin's codicil reduces your annuity. That is an ungracious sentence to speak in your own rooms. I apologize for it. It also increases certain charities. If you were a fool, you would rail. If you were a villain, you would steal. You are neither. What you have done is hire bad cunning and worse courage. Send it away." Felix set down the coins softly and looked at Holmes with a candour that had calculation behind it, as strong drink hides behind cordial. "My dear sir," he said, "if I hired any kind of courage, I would send it at you, not away from me." Holmes's eyes, which had been bright, went suddenly flat. "You mistake me," he said. "I am not the measure of your danger. Your own instrument is. Instruments cut back through the hand that drives them when the work is coarse, and this work is very coarse. A boy has been killed in a churchyard with a toy of wax and thread. A woman who sells roots has been taught to believe in cats. Do not add your valet to the number of those who will testify under oath to your taste." Lefebvre's lids drooped. If a man can bow with his eyes, he did so. "I will instruct the laundress to use the bottle," he said. "If that is the point in England upon which murder turns, I perceive that I am in a strange country." Lestrade's nostrils flared, but Holmes's hand, where it hung at his side, made the smallest motion. "We will trouble you no more today," he said to Felix. "Only a last question. Did you visit Mr. Cobb the tailor last week to purchase twist and a little wire used for stays?" Felix's brows rose a hair. "I do not darn," he said. "I thought not," Holmes returned, and the ghost of that same smile passed over his mouth. "Thank you for your time." We had reached the pavement when a boy from the yard came running with his cap in his hand and a blot of ink upon his cheek like a war mark. He thrust a slip at Lestrade and panted, "From the sergeant, sir." From St. Botolph's, Lestrade read, and the professional hardness of his face cracked along a line of anger. "Mrs. Roper's rooms have been turned over," he said. "Basket cut to pieces, tins emptied, cat gone." A neighbour saw a man with a shawl over his head go in by the back and out by the alley at 6, and his lip went thin. Cobb is missing from Turnmill Street. Lestrade swore under his breath. Holmes only inclined his head, as if the city had made good on a promise. Mrs. Roper first, he said. If our friend tidies up his stage, he leaves by nature a pin or two upon the floor. Her rooms lay off Holborn in a court that kept its own stale weather. The door stood on the latch, the poor furniture huddled as if it had been frightened into corners. The basket we had seen in the vestry was flayed, its withes strewn like old ribs. Tins lay gaping with their lids sprung. A shallow drawer had been jerked out and left hanging by one wooden runner like a broken jaw. Holmes did not step in at once. He crouched at the threshold, his long fingers poised above the dust as a surgeon's above an incision. Presently he lifted from the flooring a hair as pale as fog and powdered at the tip with the faintest breath of white. He set it upon his sleeve and breathed once upon it. A ghost of scent rose that even I, dull to such delicacies, knew by now. "Valerian," he said, "the basket keeps its history." He moved then with that economical thoroughness which is the opposite of fuss. "You will oblige me, Inspector, by keeping your shoe leather where mine has already gone." Under the table he found a sliver like a grey thorn. He held it to the light. It showed a brittle curve and a drilled eye. "Stay wire," he murmured, "the sort our man asked for to pull a loop without marking cloth." There is the habit of his hand in the twist. He laid it beside a tiny smear upon the table edge. And here, blue from paper, not bottle, ground weathered to dust by much folding, the square has been carried in a pocket till it thinned like conscience. He leaned across the sill and let his gaze travel over the beaver narrow yard. In the scum of a little puddle by the back step, a print had taken, too fine to keep long, but the fog had been our friend and laid down the shape in a film. Holmes nodded to it. "The high instep again," he observed quietly. "The heel light, the toe driving. Our Frenchman is industrious before breakfast. Lefebvre," said Lestrade between his teeth. Holmes did not answer him directly. He had lifted the torn lining of the basket and was fingering its warp. "He took the cat to carry off the talk," he said at last. "It will not do for his theatre to play on an empty stage. When he sets again, he will bring his own curtain." He straightened. "Now, Cobb, Turnmill Street received us with its rank breath of tallow and steam." Cobb's shop stood with the blind down halfway and the door upon the snib. Within, the irons smelt as if they had cooled in a hurry, and a little hiss from the gas told of fingers that had left it bared. Holmes turned the tap with a swift hand and looked once at Lestrade. "That would have wiped a ledger cleaner than a clerk's pen if a neighbour had struck a match," he said. "Pray note, Inspector, that our friend is less scrupulous with other men's walls than with churchyard railings." The board upon which Cobb chalked his measures stood bare. One page of the small day-book lay torn, leaving a furred edge like a tooth-saw. Holmes set the book at an angle, took a pencil, and with a touch as light as a breath, shaded across the remaining page. The trick, which schoolboys learn for valueless purposes, yields sometimes more than a warrant. The ghost of the writing sprang to life, impressions from the missing leaf. In Cobb's neat pinched hand we read, "Mr. Vale, 2 cards, number 36, 1 real wax, 1 length wire. Paid with fuss, coins twice, last overnail. Below, in later strokes, Botolph rail betu stanch, 4.5. Holmes's mouth did not smile, his eyes did. "He writes his confession neatly," he said, "and that is more than many gentlemen can say." He turned the book and tapped the bottom corner. "Observe, Watson, The small smear where the nail ran, bluish, not black. The habit is consistent. The man's hand takes a colour from his world. It is an excellent habit in witnesses Lestrade had been making his own, less tender survey. No sign of a struggle, he said. Either he ran or was called, and if he ran, the gas would not be left to do a footman's work. Where does a valet put a man he means to keep out of sight? In a place with many coats and few questions, Holmes returned. A club's cloakroom, a lodging-house scullery, a warehouse loft above a stable, but the more delicate hand lends a stronger place. The mews behind Mr. Felix's rooms will hold a harness room with a bolt and straw enough to smother conscience. Lestrade snapped an order to his man. You to the mews! Eyes first, hands last. If you find a bolt that sweats, stand on it till I come.
The rest of you, 2 on Felix's door, 1 to the Frenchman's pocket if he turns out. Quietly, Blast you Holmes had gone to the window. Cobb is not a brave man, but he is not a fool, he said, as if to himself. He knows that a reel of wax and a measure of iron will hang him in talk, if not at Tyburn. If he ran, he left his work to tell his tale for him. If he was taken, the taking was early. The gas was turned before 9. Mrs. Roper was visited at 6. Felix received us at 11 with coin play on his fingers, and the roll of sewing out upon the stand. The time fits in like teeth in a comb. He turned, and for one instant the light in him shone white and keen. Inspector, I will give our friend his choice of doors to walk through, and we shall see which he prefers. He wrote 3 lines upon a leaf from his pocket-book and folded it twice. Whitcomb, he said to the vicar, who had followed us with the stoutness that grief sometimes gives to men of peace. You will send this by the sexton to the boy who carries for the evening paper that likes to print what it half knows. He will put in, tonight, a paragraph to say, "It is understood that a fragment of the late Sir Alastair Fenwick's codicil, found concealed upon the person of the deceased clerk, has been placed in safe keeping, and that the police are now in possession of the exact method employed by the murderer at St. Botolph's. The North Rail will be closed after dusk. An arrest is expected." The last sentence is a kindness to Fleet Street. The first will be a cruelty to our gentleman. Lestrade's eye twinkled in spite of himself. If he reads, he'll bite his nail. He will count his coins twice, draw the last across his thumb, and take the shortest road to the thing he fears. Holmes returned. Which is not the yard, it is the paper in the tin. He does not know that it has gone back to Balcombe in a constable's breast. He thinks it lies where we first learned sense, in the vestry. We shall, for this evening, allow him to be mistaken. You mean to watch there again, I said, with a small amendment. Holmes's fingers moved thoughtfully over the table and came away with a fleck of beeswax. He rolled it without looking. Last night we snatched the pad. Tonight we will let him set it, and we shall see whose hand lays it, and what hand waits beyond the bars to take the wage. For there is a purse beyond, Watson. The loop was guided up from the lane. The killer is 2 men's work, a hand that prepares and a hand that pays. The boy from the yard came back like good news. Mews empty, sir. Save a chaise. Harness room door fresh planed at the bolt, he rattled. Straw flattened, and a scuff like a boot dragged. No man inside now. Smell of soap. The bottle at last, murmured Holmes. He changes brands as a nervous woman changes seats in church. His gaze sharpened. And a boot dragged, you say? Not 2. 1, sir. Cobb will limp for an hour when we find him, Holmes said, but he will talk if we give him tea and no tailor's tape. He looked at Lestrade. Post your men as we agreed. 1 in the vestry, 1 by the south gate, 2 in the lane. Keep them low. I do not desire to alarm cats. Watson, We shall borrow the Reverend's surplice for an hour. A murderer who believes in omens should be killed by a text." Whitcomb made a sound that might have been scandal or admiration. Holmes's mouth twitched. "Figuratively, Reverend. Your sermon may do the rest on Sunday." We left Turnmill Street with the day thinning behind the roofs and the river drawing its vapour up like a shawl. In the cab, Holmes sat with his head forward and his hands idle, a posture which in him meant more than any livelier agitation in other men. At Chancery Lane he touched my sleeve. "Observe the trifles, and they will lead you by the hand," he said, without looking at me. "A coin across a thumb, a square of blue, a loop upon iron, a cat's honest vice, these are the alphabet. Tonight we will ask the sentence to read itself aloud." Dusk gathered early, and by the time the bells cast their quarter hours across the roofs, we were again within St. Botolph's bounds. The yew stood a blacker piece of the night, and the north rail showed a glimmer of damp along its curve. Whitcomb had left a lamp burning low in the vestry, and Lestrade's men melted into their allotted shadows with the practised humility of men who hope to be forgotten until they are needed. Holmes had borrowed the surplice as he threatened. In the half-light it lent him a lank sanctity which would have diverted me at any other hour. He placed me within the church itself, where, through a narrow slit in the vestry door, I could command both the rail and the path to the wicket. He himself took station by the buttress opposite the mound, so still that had I not known him, I might have taken him for one of the dead cut in stone. The fog, which the day had fretted, returned at 8 with its old assurance, and laid a cold finger upon throat and wrist. The cat came as if it had been waiting in the wall, soundless, inevitable. It flowed upon the Fenwick mound, circled and sank. The sight, which by now should have been no more than an ugly jest, gave me again that superstition which is not formed by reason, but by flesh. I saw, too vividly for comfort, the poor lad's head bent like a man's in prayer against the iron, and the quiet that had taken him before he finished his sentence. Presently there came, from beyond the lane, the faintest scuff upon stone. A shadow sauntered and was gone. Then a hand appeared between two uprights, gloved, the finger ends bare, the nails shining like little moons. The loop of wire came with it, the pad already tied and glistening with a damp sheen. It climbed, snake-soft, the iron, settled against the bar at that mark we had taken, and waited as a hunter waits for the creature that returns by habit to a salt lick. A breath, no more, drifted toward me, almond, and a bitter undersong that memory had already learned to fear. Another sound followed, the murmur of coins in a palm, and a little click, as one was drawn across a nail with the satisfaction of a trick well practised. The breath beyond the rail was a man's, deeper than the valet's, and tempered with the faint exasperation of one who pays too often for work too coarse. It was as if every small signature we had gathered in the day had come to write itself upon the night in one line. Holmes did not spring. He let the hand finish its setting, let the wire settle slack, and then, with a motion so swift that the eye could not separate its parts, he flung the surplice like a net. It took the wire and the wrist at once. In the same instant Lestrade's men came out of the lane like rats from a drain, and there was a struggle whose sounds were more felt than heard. Breath, cloth, a heel against stone, a hissed oath in a foreign tongue. The pad slicked across the surplice where Holmes's hand had twisted it away from the iron and left upon the linen a dark, wet kiss. If he had been a man to trust to Providence rather than to plan, he would have carried that kiss on his breast. "Easy, Lefebvre," said Holmes in a voice as cool as the fog. "There is nothing of honour in a loop on a graveyard bar." The valet writhed once more like a hooked eel, then froze with that quick calculation we had seen in his eyes. In the struggle, the surplice had slid, the pad, jarred by the jerk, fell, and would have splashed upon the cobbles had not a grey shape, quicker than any of us, struck at it with a forefoot and sent it skidding under the rail. Malkin, having done this one honest piece of mischief, sat down and blinked, as if at a private joke. Beyond the bars a hat brim edged back, and a face showed for one instant, no more than a cutout in fog, a narrow oval, the lightest suggestion of a smile, and the gleam of a coin held between finger and thumb, preparatory to that singular caress across the nail. Then it withdrew with a polite quickness that mocked us. Lestrade's men lunged, the fog closed like a curtain, and their oaths were wasted on cloth and night. Holmes had the valet by the wrist still, and with the other hand caught the wire and drew it down lest a foolish constable should set his teeth too near his death. "Lefebvre," he said gently, "you will be so good as to tell the inspector where he may find Mr. Cobb alive." The Frenchman's breath came thinly through his teeth. "If you loosen the cloth," he returned, not without dignity, "I will save you the time you will otherwise spend in smelling stables." Holmes eased the twist without releasing the man's hand. Lestrade, who had more confidence in iron than in linen, secured the rest. "Speak!" he snapped. "In the mews," said Lefebvre evenly, "behind the rooms, where my master is not, in the harness room which you examined with your eyes and not with your fingers. There is a feed bin with a false bottom. A strap holds it in place under the corn. He makes a noise sometimes when the cart goes by. If you kick the side twice, you will hear him answer, if he's not too much afraid to use his tongue." 2 men were off before the last word left his mouth. Lefebvre looked at Holmes and for the first time set down something like reluctant respect. "It was tidy," he observed, "until you put a rag between the work and the iron." "Until you tried to make a fable do the work of a fact," Holmes returned. "You had a churchyard, a cat, and a breath. You lacked courage enough for a pistol and patience enough for a solicitor. You brought your trade into God's air and thought fog would keep counsel." "Fog does," said Lefebvre softly. "Englishmen do not. You told the newspaper where the paper sleeps." Holmes's eyes glinted. "And you came to fetch what you believed lay in the vestry. You will forgive me if I disappointed you by disappointing Fleet Street." The lane men returned empty, save for a single coin dropped in the scuffle. Lestrade's lamp showed a tiny nick along its edge where some file had once corrected the mint's indifference. Holmes did not touch it. He only looked until the line of his mouth flattened and the light went quite out of his eyes. "He keeps a private mint, does Mr. Felix," he said. "Each shilling must be taught to please his nail." The men from the mews came back with a shape between them that at first I took for a sack. It proved to be a man bound with his own tape and gagged with a strip of sacking. His hair was stuck to his head with sweat, and there was corn dust in the black at the corners of his eyes. When we had him in the vestry and a cup of something hot between his hands, Cobb told his tale in jerks and gulps, the knock at the door before dawn, the Frenchman's gloved hand with a little polite tap of the wire upon the board, the quiet monsieur that had unstrung him more than any oath, the gas turned up, and the shiver that took him when he saw the flame. He had gone with them because his wife slept, and because he would rather be called a coward by his own heart than have it branded upon his house by a coroner. "They said I had wrote too neat," he muttered, when breath allowed him shame. "They said the yard could read a ghost if I left it." "They would have it. I should go away to Brighton for my lungs." His mouth twisted. "I have none." "You have a tongue," said Lestrade grimly. "Use it." "Who paid you to measure rails?" Cobb's glance slid to Lefebvre and back again. "A gentleman called Vale. He had the valet's wrist and the master's coin. He said if ever a clerk came to the north rail with a little parcel, I was to put the rail in the way of his breast and the coin in the way of my hunger, and say nothing. I was not to see the dead. I was to see my wife's Sunday shoes. He broke then and sobbed like a child, which in such men is no unmanly exercise but a purging. Holmes let it run its course without indecency. When Cobb could speak again, he asked, as if we sat in a tailor's parlour over a pattern book, "Describe Mr. Vale." Cobb obeyed, and in the portrait Mr. Felix's polite shadow walked again, the neat boot, the coin play, the patience of a temper that had learned to pass through service to its object. Yet it was a shadow still. The valet's hand had set the loop, and the master's face had not shown itself to the constable's lamp. Lefebvre, when pressed, smiled, and said with the resignation of a man betrayed by a friend's taste, "My master likes to see the first stitch and the last. Between he smokes, it is a pity," said Holmes contemplatively, "that he likes to smoke in fog." He turned to Lestrade. "You will charge this man with the murder of Owen Briggs and with conspiracy to extort and to tamper with a testamentary document. You will pick up Mr. Felix tonight if you can. If you cannot, you will take him tomorrow morning before breakfast. He will prefer to be arrested in a clean shirt. Post a man upon his back stairs. He is not gull enough to bolt by the front, and his ankles are good." Lestrade's jaw took on that angle which in him meant that professionalism and relish had shaken hands. He gave the orders in a low tone that reached everywhere it should and nowhere it should not. Whitcomb sat as if someone had removed the bones from him and left Charity in their place. Mrs. Roper, who had come at the news of the Frenchman's capture like a bird who both fears and cannot help but hop nearer, stood at the vestry door and cried noiselessly into her shawl. Whether for her basket, her cat, or her fear, I cannot tell. Holmes lifted the fallen surplice, considered the stain upon it, and folded the cloth so that the patch lay within. "We will send this to Baker Street," he said, "to complete the tale for those who will need to see it bottled. The rest we have. A loop and a pad, a wire, a reel with teeth upon its wax, a coin with a vanity upon its rim, and a scrap of vellum under a square of blue. The pattern is woven. Only the hand that chose the colours has yet to be shown to the court." "And you'll show it," I said, for I had learned to hear in him when the long curve of his thought had turned the corner toward decision. He looked past me through the slit at the cat upon the mound, and smiled that thin private smile of his, which I have seen before, battles, human and chemical. "I will ask it," he replied. "Sometimes truth is like a cat, Watson. It lies where one has lured it until the one who lured it believes in omens. Then it moves of its own accord and sits upon the guilty lap. We did not sleep." Lestrade took Lefebvre away with the tenderness due to glass that will be asked to bear a weight. In the morning, and Cobb, restored to his wife, sat with both hands about his teacup as if it were the world. Holmes and I drove to Baker Street with the marked surplice folded like a sacrament between us. There he made the last assurance with his bottles, corked it, labelled it for the magistrate's eye, and sat for a little with his chin upon his fist and his gaze in that distance which has no geography. When the first milk carts were abroad, a boy knocked with a message from Mr. Balcombe, who had been wise enough to send to Baker Street before he sent to the yard. A note had been thrust under his door at dawn. "Sir, a gentleman, much interested in the late Sir Alistair's dispositions, begs a moment in your private room at 9 to assure himself that idle street talk has not touched your box. He comes alone." V. Vale, said I. Vanity, said Holmes, and the corner of his mouth lifted. We will oblige him. Mr. Balcom received us at 8.5, in the same grave temper in which he had borne the previous evening. He had the deed-box upon the table and his ledger to hand. There was no need for the latter, but solicitors, like soldiers, keep their arms within reach when danger is about. At Holmes's direction he had placed upon a side table a common tin of the kind we had seen in Briggs's pocket, and beneath it, visible if one stooped too far, a folded square of blue, no more than the wrapper from the laundress's paper, but it would pass for what our gentleman expected to find when he came to fetch confirmation of his own tale. I would sooner not engage in theatricals, Balcom murmured, uneasy in the role. But if it will mend a murder, it will not mend it, Holmes returned quietly. It will show whose hands tore the cloth. He placed me behind the door, where I might see and not be seen, beckoned Lestrade to the inner room where a crack of the communicating door afforded him a view of the table, and himself took a chair by the window, whose light fell across the visitor's right hand as he entered. He had arranged the poor stage as exactly as a man of science lays out his table for a dissection, light here, shade there, the instrument to hand, the basin ready. Mr. Felix came on the stroke. He had left insolence at home and brought only ease. That change in a man is always worth the price of a seat. He bowed to Balcom with a respect which had a little smile buried in it for future use, to me with the politeness due to a stranger, and to Holmes as one bows to a curiosity one has seen in a case and wished to see alive. "Sir," said he to Balcom, "I thank you. There is uncivil rumour abroad. It touches a lady whom I esteem. If I could look," his hand indicated the deed-box lightly, "upon the face of a seal I should have rest." "The seal," returned Balcom, with a composure that did his profession honour, "is as my firm placed it. I do not exhibit papers to private gentlemen, but if you will write to the executor at the proper time—" Felix's hand, which had idled upon the table's edge, flicked a coin. He did not look at it. The thumb caressed the rim with that minute rasp we knew. It came and went like a tick in a pulse. He smiled. "Executor," he repeated, as if tasting the word for its texture. "The proper time. Sir, propriety is a virtue in a lawyer. In a cousin it is sometimes a fever." Holmes's gaze had travelled no higher than the fingers. "You file your shillings," he observed in that mild voice of his that makes men show their throats. It corrects the mint's negligence and pleases the nail. Felix's coin paused between finger and thumb. It was as if he had recognized the voice from daylight, and that recognition had stiffened some muscle that habit had taught to flow. "I keep small economies in repair," he said, and set the coin down by the little tin. "You keep small instruments also," Holmes returned. "Wax with the mark of your teeth, no. 36. Twist, wire that does not bruise satin. I commend the taste, if not the application." Felix turned his head then and looked full at Holmes. "Sir," said he, not impatiently, "you are a man who loves a pattern. You will have made one to amuse yourself out of bluing cats and vestries. Pray be careful. Cats are untrustworthy, vestries leak, and bluing makes gentlemen look ridiculous when it adheres to the thumb and will not wash away before luncheon." "Indeed," said Holmes, and his eyes had the faintest glint. "Let us try." He indicated with the smallest movement the innocuous tin upon the side table. Felix's gaze slid to it, and beyond it. It did not rest. He did not go to it. He moved around the room as if he had been shown a picture and were polite enough to admire the frame first. He stood a moment by the deed-box, not touching it, and let his finger fall idly upon the blue blotter. When he lifted it, there was upon the nail the palest breath of colour. He wiped it upon his glove with indifference, and, in so doing, disclosed to the exact angle Holmes had chosen the neat patch at the glove's edge where a drop of something had once dried and been rubbed away, leaving, like a thought that is not confessed, the faint white where grease has been crowded out. Holmes did not look at the glove. He was looking at the man's eyes, at the little flicker left and downward towards the side table, and under it, where the laundress's square lay like a poor secret. There is an attention that is as good as a hand, and it will move a thing an inch nearer. Felix's attention had that quality. He drifted, as men drift, to the thing that mattered to him. And when he had his hand upon the tin, he held it with the fingers tight, not like a man who wonders what box this may be, but like one who has journeyed for a little comfort, and is at last within reach of the familiar flask. "Sir," said Balcom, very courteously, for in the presence of folly the English gentleman is politest, "you will not open that." Felix looked up, and for an instant the two men showed the trades to which they belonged. "No," said he, and smiled. "But then, Mr. Balcom, what is a box for, if not to be opened by hands that do not tremble?" "They tremble sometimes," Holmes answered. "When a boy has died to put a scrap beneath a blue square." "Set it down, Mr. Fenwick." "Inspector." Lestrade came out from the inner door without haste. He had a small paper in his hand, the ghost from Cobb's day-book which we had brought with us, and in his face that sober satisfaction which signifies a warrant already half written by the facts. Felix did not start. He set the tin down as if it had burnt him and took up his coin again with an effect of contempt that was bravely done. "If you mean to arrest me," he said, "arrest me. But do not insult me with needle and thread. I do not sew." "No," said Holmes. "You hire men who do, and send them to churchyards. You write to solicitors at dawn and sign with a name that is not in Burke. You stand outside rails and pay in the lane, while your valet moves the wire up the iron to a height measured at Turnmill Street and tested with a square of blue. You count your coins twice and draw the last along a nail that has trained itself upon its edge, until the very shilling keeps your signature and drops it in a churchyard when the fog disobliges you." Lestrade laid the coin found by the rail beside the one under Felix's finger. The nick along the rim showed in both the same neat correction, not gouged, but stroked into exactness. Felix did not look down. He lifted his gaze a fraction, as a fencer does when someone has put a foot upon the hem of his cloak. "You are a very clever man," he said to Holmes without warmth. "I am a very patient man," Holmes returned, "and London is a very loquacious city. Your servant will speak to save his own skin. Your tailor has already spoken, on paper, which is the least perjured of witnesses. Your cat would speak if men had ears for what animals say when they choose a lap. It is possible we shall give you that pleasure." As if the city had been listening for its cue, there came upon the window-sill a grey shadow with a straight back and an air of proprietorship. Malkin had found us, whether by scent upon a cuff, by the old herb in the hem of a basket Mrs. Roper had brought to the court's corner and set down while she cried into it, or by that instinct cats possess for arriving with an effect. She stepped in at the opened sash with the indifference of rank, made a small circle to test her footing, and, pausing but the breadth of a breath at my boot, sprang without ceremony into Mr. Felix Fenwick's lap. She settled there with a sigh I could swear was of content, and pushed her face once against the cuff of his right glove, as if to thank an old friend for a remembered sweetness. Felix did not move. He had courage for this much, but the colour that had kept its economy in him betrayed, at last, an extravagance. It rose, it went. He lifted the cat gently and set her down upon the table. His hand left the faintest grey hair upon the black kid where the light fell cleanest. "Inspector," said Holmes quietly, "if you please." Lestrade read the warrant as if he were reading a prayer. Felix listened with a head a little bowed and a mouth that had lost interest in its curve. When it was done, he said, very low, and not to us, "I hired courage. It chose the fog. I should have chosen glass." He looked up then, and the old insolence came back, to put a bow upon the scene. "Mr. Holmes, I trust you will enjoy your cat." "It is the court will enjoy your coin," Holmes replied. "They are fond of small points in that room." He rose. "Watson, bring Mrs. Roper in when you go. She has earned a short word, and 2 sovereigns that will not rasp her nail." We came away with the city, shaken out to a tolerable clearness by the noon breeze. Holmes's face had that worn lightness it takes when the mind has done its climbing and stands upon the ridge looking over. "You see the sentence beginning to read itself," he said, as if we had been discussing a book. "In the afternoon we will put in the commas, and in the evening we shall have the sense entire." We lunched absently in a chop-house off Carey Street while Lestrade sent his papers flying yardward. When we returned to Queen Anne Street, it was to find Lady Fenwick closeted with Mr. Balcom, the deed-box before them, and the little square of vellum, now replaced beneath its innocent blue, once more secure by proper custody. Holmes asked leave to speak plainly, and the lady granted it with that composure which had already begun to distinguish her grief from the vulgar sort. "Madam," said he, "the poor boy Briggs tried to sell a proof to a man who wished to buy silence. He died for imagining that thieves bargain as cleanly as lawyers. The proof will now speak in a better court. Meanwhile, the stage upon which your cousin chose to rehearse his courage is dismantled. The man who set the loop has been taken. The man who paid him will answer." She folded her hands, and for the first time since we had come into her house, let them tremble. "Sir Alister was no coward," she said. "But I have learned in a week what sorts of people live within one's name without being of it. Will justice spare me the spectacle?" Holmes inclined his head. "If justice consults taste, it will do so because Mr. Balcom knows how to phrase a request. But justice rarely yields the stage to our wishes. It prefers a brighter light." He turned a little to the solicitor. "I must ask that the codicil be produced before the magistrate today, under seal, merely that the word fragment may be put to rest." There has been too much play with scraps. Balcom assented, relieved to be employed upon a respectable labour after the night's theatricals. As we took our leave, Holmes paused by the door, as if a draught had touched him that interested his senses. "You have dismissed the cat from your mind, madam?" he asked, with a courteous dryness. "I had rather think of angels," she returned, yet a faint smile moved. "But if Mrs. Roper brings some harmless root to my kitchen garden next spring, I shall let the creature sleep where it pleases and tell the neighbours that the dead love peace." In the cab, Holmes sat in that bowed stillness which, in him, was not fatigue, but the last disposition of pieces upon a board. "You perceive," he said at length, "that our gentleman had the neatness of a man who has long paid other men to do what he will not soil his fingers with. He tried to convert a scandal into a superstition. Failing there, he will try to convert evidence into taste. We will deny him both. At the Yard, Lefebvre had been unwrapped from his urbanities and was now the professional, cool, calculating, and, within the limits of his interest, surprisingly frank. Lestrade had the knack of removing from a man the false coin of bravado until he was left with his real money. The Frenchman had already written 2 pages in a small, exact hand that made even his confession look like a bill. "He says," observed Lestrade, tapping the paper, "that Mr. Felix, Mesh Felix in his style, told him a clerk had grown too curious, that a token must be taken from him before he chattered, where tokens grow into proofs, and that the thing must be done without a mark. He describes the loop, the pad, and the height. He admits buying the wax and twist under orders and measuring the rail by Cobb's book. He will not say he knew the pad to be poison, only asleep. And I am not sure, Mr. Holmes, that we shall prove he did, but he adds this, that his master likes to see the first stitch and the last, and that on Friday he heard the coin trick in the fog and turned when the shilling clicked. Which, Holmes murmured, is as good as the back of a head at a window. The law has hanged men for less. He sat then with Lefebvre for 10 minutes that were not unkind. He spoke to him of wax and wire and of the tooth marks in soft blocks when a man's hands are full. He asked, as one artisan to another, whether the pad were greased with lanolin or with a cheaper fat. The valet admitted to mutton tallow for the first night and a better base for the rest. Holmes nodded as if the change contented some small economy in his mind. He inquired, too, whether the essence had been obtained where scents are sold for the handkerchief or where the pharmacists sit behind their glass. The Frenchman, with a delicate shrug, indicated both. He was a workman, proud of the clean join. Cynicism in him was not cruelty, but a species of polish. "The court will prefer your precision to your patriotism," Holmes concluded, and returned to Lestrade. "You will have the bottles and the cloth. I will add the iron test. The almond that one may wear in a glove will, in another form, turn Prussian blue at a touch of salts and acid. A magistrate likes a colour he can name. Meanwhile, keep Felix from his valet. He is of the sort that whispers nobility into any ear that has served him and finds gratitude there." We were presently summoned to the magistrate's chamber for the first hearing. It was not a dramatic affair, London justice seldom is. Mr. Balcom produced his sealed packet. The seal was recognized by 2 who had witnessed it in April, and by the physician who had seen it Friday. Lestrade laid our meagre theatre upon the green baize, loop, wire, reel, with its wax bearing the neat crescent where teeth had stroked, the blue square from Briggs's tin, the coin picked at the rail with its private correction, and the surplice with its treacherous stain. Holmes, called briefly, spoke so dryly that one could almost forget that this pale chemistry had crept along an iron to a boy's heart. He did not enlarge, he merely arranged. When he set down the 2 shillings and the court compared the file's caress upon each rim, there was that little intake of breath that tells you when citizens see a thing become a fact. Felix, between his keepers, preserved through it a restraint that would have become a better cause. He did not deny letters to Balcom or visits to Turnmill Street. He did not admit them. He smiled where denial would have been vulgar and silence impolite. When the cat, which had no more business in a court than in a solicitor's office, appeared upon the sill, brought by no hand I could name and dismissed by none, he let his eyes drop to it for a fraction, and then away, as a man might do at a theatre when an ill-trained hound crosses the stage. I confess the sight pricked some human part of me that cases usually leave untouched. A life like Felix's has its own art. It is hard to see it end beneath the ledger. The remand granted, we came away to Baker Street, where Holmes at last permitted the violin to take what remained of his restlessness. He played not long, and when he ceased, he stood a moment, with the bow fallen in his fingers. "There is a thing still out of true," he said. "Not the pattern, its last thread. Felix is more economical than the method deserves. The graveyard, why that extravagance? He could have had the boy brush a collar with the same sleep in a doorway and passed on. Why the iron and the cat? To frighten talk away from the fact, you said. True. But it is a great noise to drown a small thought. To choose a churchyard is to say, no hands touched him. To choose a cat is to say, no men conspired. Just so. Yet there is a third denial hidden there. What? He feared some witness he could not buy, and so he built a legend to silence not only tongues but time. The rail mutes the bruise, the fog mutes the eye, the cat mutes the memory. He meant the story to outlive the clerk and the quarter's gossip. Our gentleman thinks in seasons. He took up his hat again. Come, Watson. We will make one last visit. A house keeps its own weather. I want to feel how long the draught has blown. We went not to Felix's rooms, but to the quiet church off Fetter Lane. The yard was bare of gapers. Whitcomb's notice about the rail had had its effect, and the yew kept its counsel with professional gravity. Holmes stood where the pad had hung, and then where the cat had curled. He paced from wicket to vestry, and touched, with an odd tenderness, the rosemary on the new mound. Saltpetre, he murmured, looking at the wall. Blue on a cuff, an almond in a sleeve, a coin along a nail. It will do, he faced about suddenly. And there, do you see it, Watson? The only thing they forgot to tidy, on the inside face of the vestry door, low where a woman's hand would pass, there was the faintest bloom of blue, as from a folded square often taken and as often replaced. It had been wiped, but blue is a persistent gossip. Holmes set his thumb upon it and lifted the stain. He smelt his glove, smiled without mirth, and turned the latch. Within, on a peg where surplices hang and parish notices yellow, there dangled a key's loop, Whitcomb's. Upon its leather sat a single grey hair, with a pinch of white dust at the tip. Not an omen, Holmes said softly. A habit. And habits make witnesses. The maid never wrote, the vicar never lied, the sexton was merely frightened. But someone with lawful entry rehearsed by day what would be done by night, using the cleanly door and the safer hand. We shall ask to whom the parish gave a key when Sir Alister took rooms in town. He looked at me from under his lids, and the light in them had that thin brightness which always presaged the last step. Felix has good taste in instruments. He borrowed even God's. The vestry was close with the smell of damp stone and old surplices when Holmes put his hand upon the little loop of keys. He lifted the grey hair gently as though it were the last, faint voice of the dead clerk calling across the silence, and let it fall upon his sleeve. Lestrade, who had grown patient with such trifles, bent close enough to see the smear of white dust upon its tip. From the wall, Holmes said, from the habit of one who rehearsed by day what must be done by night. Felix had a key. He walked in when others went about their offices, tested the latch, smudged the square, and made certain the cat would be found where he desired it. In his neatness he betrayed himself. The magistrate required little more. Lefebvre's confession, Cobb's miserable testimony, the coin with its private scar, the wax with the teeth still plain, and now the hair upon a key loop which no valet might lawfully hold, all wove together into a net that no courtesy could tear. Felix heard the charge in silence, the coin no longer restless between his fingers. He had at least the pride to face it without complaint. When the verdict was read weeks later, it was received without drama. The newspapers, which had fed greedily upon cats and churchyards, learned to speak instead of a codicil saved from tampering and a poor boy whose death had turned a scandal into a lesson. Lady Fenwick, who bore herself with a composure I could not but admire, thanked Holmes in words whose dignity owed nothing to exaggeration. "You have given me back my husband's honour," she said, "and shown me that grief need not be ashamed to ask for help." Holmes bowed as if she had praised him for a good deduction and dismissed it from his thought. Mrs. Roper was left with 2 sovereigns, a new basket, and her troublesome cat, which returned of its own accord to Holborn one morning, as though nothing had occurred. Cobb went back to his irons, chastened, but with his wife's Sunday shoes secure. Lestrade gathered the credit, as is the custom of his office, though he did not fail to nod towards Baker Street when the reporters pressed him too hard. On a fogless evening not long after, I found Holmes at his violin, the tune no more than a thread of thought. When he set it down, he said only, "A trifling thing, Watson." A wire, a square of blue, a cat upon a grave. Yet from such trifles men attempt murders, and from the same trifles they are discovered. It is always the detail. He lit his pipe and sat back, his eyes half closed. Felix counted coins upon his nail. In the end, Watson, it was his nail that counted him. I could not better the phrase nor improve upon the justice of it, and so the matter of the cat that slept on the grave passed into memory, leaving me once again astonished by my friend's genius, and reminded that in London, as in life, it is the smallest of signs that lead Sherlock Holmes to the largest of truths.